All right, let's take a look at the 2018 Buffalo Bills roster. Starting at quarterback, there are two quarterbacks on the roster. One is Nathan Peterman, and the other is John Allen. Neither of these guys, as you can see, have a really large amount of experience. You do have Nathan Peterman, who played some last year, but to be honest, didn't really do all that well. You can see the numbers there. He really started that one game towards the end of the season and did terrible. They ended up putting Tyrod Taylor back in, but 49% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. It's bad. They're bad numbers. The good news is that he looked a lot better in the preseason this season. He had very, very good numbers in the preseason. So, it'll be interesting to see what Nathan Peterman does now that he's been named as the starter there in Buffalo. But, a lot of Bills fans were eager to move on from Tyrod Taylor, but I think in actuality, they might be disappointed they did that. I know that, listen, I have a lot of Bills fans that tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I must not have watched a Bills game last year, that if I was a Bills fan, I would know that Tyrod Taylor wasn't any good. We'll just see. We will just see. I understand the arguments for why Tyrod Taylor is not a great quarterback. He got you to the playoffs. You hadn't been in the playoffs in 17 years. How many other quarterbacks tried to get the Bills to the playoffs and failed, but Tyrod Taylor succeeded? Now, a lot of that had to do with the defense. The Bills have a very, very strong defense. They have a solid run game behind LeSean McCoy, but I really do believe that Tyrod Taylor is a winner. And we'll see, if I look at the Browns roster versus the Bills roster, I think the Browns have a much better team than the Bills have, which is really a condemnation of the Bills GM. But, beyond that, when I look, I'll tell you right now, if I could choose between Nathan Peterman, John Allen, or Tyrod Taylor, I'd take Tyrod Taylor. That's what I would do. But I understand that they thought, look, we're never going to win a Super Bowl with Tyrod Taylor, but we'll see if you're able to win a Super Bowl with John Allen. He's got a monster arm, but is he going to be able to ever get the kind of accuracy that he'll need to really be successful in the NFL? And that's your other choice there. First round pick, 22-year-old guy. That's your future. But for now, your present might be Nathan Peterson, and we'll see what he's able to do there in Buffalo. At running back, we talked about already LeSean McCoy. 30 years old, though. He's 30 years old. He's got a lot of miles on him. And you can see how his yards per carry dropped off significantly last year to the lowest of his career. Okay, so, the year before, his second year in Buffalo, he had 5.4 yards a carry, 13 touchdowns. Last year, he had high volume, still managed to get 1,100 yards, but his efficiency dropped down to 4 yards a carry and 6 touchdowns. I don't know if LeSean McCoy is going to be able to carry your entire offense. Then, last year, the Bills had Travaris Cadet and Mike Tolbert at running back. They weren't, superstars by any means. But what did the Bills do to try to upgrade at running back over the offseason? They get another 30-year-old two more 30-year-old running backs. Chris Ivory and Tywan Jones? Really? Chris Ivory, whose yards per carry hasn't been above 4 yards in, 2 seasons? his 2 years in Jacksonville, he had 439 yards and then 382 yards. I mean, it blows my mind. It shocks me that the Bills GM thought that out of all the running backs on the market, Orleans Darkle was out there. There were several guys out there. Adrian Peterson was available, and they went with Chris Ivory. I'll never understand it. Then they brought in Taiwan Jones. He was actually on the roster there last year, but didn't have any carries, as you can see. In 2016, he actually had -8 yards rushing. This is what you have at running back, and then you have a 7th round pick from 2015. I don't get it. I really don't get it. And then the only decent one of the bunch is a 30-year-old guy that is being accused of sending, a guy to go and harass his ex-girlfriend and pistol whipped her to get his jewelry back. Now, I understand it was a tough situation for LeSean McCoy that he broke up and he's trying to get the girl out of his house and she won't leave, and that's why you can't date crazy hot chicks, by the way. Lesson learned. Don't date crazy hot chicks. You think, oh, this is going to be great, and then you can't get them out of your house. But, I don't know. I said he's been accused. If the person actually did say, hey, give that jewelry back or whatever, that's pretty not a good sign, but it'll probably be impossible to actually get enough evidence against him. So I have no idea whether, he's guilty or not. But you got a 30-year-old running back who's just obviously starting to wear down like a 30-year-old running back, and then you have Chris Ivory. I don't get it at all. At wide receiver, you got Travis Benjamin, whose numbers dropped off dramatically upon coming to Buffalo. You can see there with Carolina, even after his injury in 2015, he had 941 yards receiving. In 2016, he was on pace to hit 950 last season. And then all of a sudden, in 6 games in Buffalo, he gets 217 yards. Now, is that Tyrod Taylor's fault? Is that the offensive line's fault? And we're about to get there in a second. I don't know, but those are big drop-off numbers. Then, who do you have behind Kelvin Benjamin? Well, you have Zay Jones, who was the 2nd-round pick last year. That's your best hope, but he only had 316 yards last season. You have Jeremy Curley, who only had 200 yards last season with the Jets. He had a strong year with San Francisco in 2016, but 2 out of the last 3 seasons, he had less than 250 yards receiving. So I don't know if he's going to be able to carry your offense. Then you got Andre Holmes. That's a 30-year-old guy that might be a okay number 4 option. And then a 6th-round pick and an undrafted free agent rookie. So which one of these guys, along with your 2 shaky quarterbacks, is going to carry the offense this year? I don't know, man. If I was a Bills fan, I would sit back and be prepared for maybe a number 1 pick next year. They really have. I think the Bills have the worst offense in the NFL. You do have one good, solid tight end in Charles Clay. Last season, 558 yards. He's had over 500 yards receiving the last 5 seasons. He is getting a little bit older. He is 29. But that's not going to be enough to carry the whole team. Obviously, this quarterback is going to be trying to target LeSean McCoy in the running game and out of the backfield. They're going to try to hit Charles Clay. And then pray to God that Kelvin Benjamin bounces back, or that, your 2nd-round pick from last year, Zay Jones, has a breakout season. I don't know, man. I don't know where the offense is going to come from. Then in tight end, you also have Jason Kroom, who was an undrafted rookie last season. You have Logan Thomas, who was a fourth-round pick back in 2014. He's got 67 career yards. And Kari Lee. Now, what if you had a dominant offensive line? Maybe something could happen, but look at your offensive line. It's horrible. You have Dion Dawkins, who is okay. Dion Dawkins was a second-round pick last year, so he's entering just his second year. He's a young guy, but he started to do fairly well towards the end of the year last year when he came in. Cordy Glenn was injured last season. That thrust Dion Dawkins into playing. Started out a little shaky, but played fairly well at the end. So that's why the Bills traded Cordy Glenn away. So Dion Dawkins might be all right. But then you got what? Vladimir Dukas at left guard. You've got Ryan Groy at center. That might be okay. John Miller at right guard, who did not play that well last year. And then Jordan Mills, who was pretty horrible. So the entire right side of the offensive line looks extremely worrisome. And then at left guard, I would say this. The left side of the offensive line looks a lot better than the right side. That's for sure. So is this offensive line going to be able to open up holes for the 30-year-old running backs and give your shaky quarterbacks enough time to complete, passes down the field? If I'm a Bills fan, I'm scared to death. That's all I'm saying. The defense is a totally different story. The defense looks great. At defensive end, the starters appear to be Trent Murphy and Jerry Hughes. Trent Murphy had 9 sacks in 2016, but is coming off an ACL tear. The Bills gave him 3 years and $22.5 million. If he's able to bounce back and perform at the level he did before he tore his ACL, that'll be a great value deal for the Bills. It's a big if, but he's a young guy, he's somewhat young, 27. Doesn't have so much miles on him, at least. So he's got a shot at it. It's his first contract after his rookie contract. So, I understand that. Jerry Hughes is excellent. He's getting older. He's 30 years old, but, he still had 4 sacks last season, 44 tackles, 11 tackles for a loss. He's still got some juice left in his tank, hopefully. So, not bad. And then backing those guys up, you got Eddie Yarborough, who did really well last year, had 34 tackles. And then Shaq Lawson, who is a former first-round pick, hasn't lived up to his draft status by any means, but did have 4 sacks last season. So the defensive ends should be at least maybe above average, I think. On the defensive tackle, you've got solid defensive tackles. Kyle Williams is coming back for one last rodeo. He's 35. But you can still see he had a decent year last year. He had, 41 tackles. He's not as good as he was in 2016. I think he made the Pro Bowl that year. But he's still doing well. Still doing all right at defensive tackle. But you brought in Star Lotulelei, gave him a really, really big contract. I think he gave him like 5 years and $50 million, some huge amount. But he's, the run game, you needed to do something in the run game because the Bills were not very solid against the run last season. And so that's a big help in kind of solidifying that middle. Adolphus Washington will be back. He's a really decent guy to have as a backup defensive tackle. And then to have Harrison Phillips, which I think was a steal in the third round. He did absolutely amazing things in college. And so to have those four guys as your two deep at defensive tackle, it's a really solid. I think they have, easily a top 10, maybe a top 5 defensive line in the NFL. At linebacker, the Bills lost Preston Brown, who is their middle linebacker, but they really let him go because he really struggled in coverage. He led the league in tackles, but at the same time just wasn't very good in coverage. And in today's NFL, to be a really effective, good linebacker, you have to be able to cover. So that's why they brought in Tremaine Edwards in the first round to be that guy. And, he's going to start there at middle linebacker. You also have Lorenzo Alexander is coming back. He is going to be 35 years old. So he is no spring chicken. But look, the last 2 years, the best years of his career. Had 76 tackles in 2016. Was an All-Pro. That's what the yellow means there. And in 2017, he had 73 tackles. Didn't have the same kind of 12.5 sacks he did in 2016, but did well. Still got a little bit more left in him, it seems. So, Lorenzo Alexander will be back, and he will be one of the linebackers there in Buffalo. And then Matt Milano is your other starter there at weak side linebacker. Was a rookie 5th round pick last season, young guy, in his second year now. And you have a decent group of starting linebackers. You also have Ramon Humber, who is really good last season, 89 tackles. He'll be providing some depth. Julian Stanford and Dion Lacey, two former undrafted guys, will be the reserve linebackers. So not too bad. At corner, you have Tre'Davious White, a first-round pick from 2017. Really, really good rookie season. Should be the lockdown corner that Buffalo needs. Vontae Davis will be the other corner, likely. And it'll be a big question, though, is will he be healthy coming off that groin injury that he had last season? Taron Johnson, a rookie 4th round pick, might be the starting nickel corner. So that'll be a guy to keep an eye on. Will he be able to hold the fort as a rookie 4th round pick? And there's also Philip Gaines, who didn't play that well last year with Kansas City, only 3 passes defended. Lafayette Pitts, a guy who has a couple of years in the league actually, but was undrafted. And then Ryan Lewis. So that would be a concern if I was a Bills fan. The guys that they lost at corner were E.J. Gaines, Leonard Johnson, and Sharice Wright. But none of those guys did very well. So they try to bring in, Vontae Davis, Philip Gaines, and drafted Taron Johnson. But it'll be really interesting to see, can the defensive line get enough pressure that those guys can, lock down their receivers long enough to keep teams from making big plays? Because I'm not 100% sure. If Vontae Davis can't get healthy, it could get rough for some of those Buffalo corners. And then in the safeties, you got Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, who is a really good starting tandem there in Buffalo. In fact, Micah Hyde was an All-Pro last season. 82 tackles, 5 interceptions, 13 passes defended. A very, very good player. And then in addition, to have Jordan Poyer, who had 95 tackles and 5 interceptions and also had 13 passes defended. That is a great start. It's two very strong starting safeties. They might have one of the best starting safety duos in the league. So backing those guys up will be Raphael Bush, a veteran that I know from a lot of times in New Orleans. As a Falcons fan, they played against Bush a lot. And then Saron Neal, who was a 5th-round pick, rookie this season. He'll be backing those guys up. So altogether on the defense, a great defensive line for the Bills. Really decent, at least, starting linebackers. Very strong safeties, but the corners, that's what you're going to have to look at. Our team's going to end up being able to pass on you. Will those guys be able to stop receivers from making big plays? And that's a huge, huge question for the Bills' defense this year. But I don't know if it's really going to matter because, I don't know if the Bills are going to be able to score enough points on anybody. I mean, how many teams do you think that the Bills can score 21 points on? How many teams do you think the Bills can score 17 points on? 2 touchdowns and a field goal? I don't know. Not many. So, this defense, I guess they might be able to hold teams to below 17 points. Certainly some of them, but not enough to finish 8-8. So I think it's going to be a really, really rough season for Buffalo. In fact, I don't think Buffalo is going to win more than 4 games this year, to be honest with you. But let me know what you think. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out soon enough. If you like this video, please click subscribe because every week we're going to break down every single game that's coming up. We're going to show you the other team that's going to be playing the Bills, as well as all the other games in the league that week. And we're going to say, okay, look how these two teams match up. Look at the running backs on this team. Let's look at the defensive line, the linebackers from this team, and let's look at the wide receivers and the corners, etc. We're going to break down every game each week so that you know both for fantasy football and for betting, if it's legal in your state, how two teams should match up and what you should do both in fantasy and in your bets. So make sure you click subscribe because this is going to be the most thorough coverage of the NFL that you can find on YouTube. Thanks so much.